lovers out there. This is Beats and Measures, and we are here discussing music in all its forms, all its glories, all its pitfalls.
Let's do it.
I'm Jay DeCarey.
Yeah, I'm Devin DeCarey.
And today we are going to be talking about... Actually, Jay, maybe you should give this introduction. It was your idea.
Yeah. Okay, so there's been some conversation that I've heard about this sort of de-evolution of rock. How rock music isn't like it used to be. And people cite bands like... Nickelback as the primary suspect of where rock all went wrong, and we're gonna do so. We did our own research, and we're sort of coming to our own conclusions as to where precisely it all went wrong.
So let's start where it started, though.
Yeah.
And obviously, the late 40s, 50s is really when it became part of the American lexicon as a art form, rock music, and of course, I'm talking about artists like Elvis Presley and Chuck Berry and Jerry Lee Lewis, just to name a few, as to giving credit to being, the birthplace of rock music.
That's sort of when it became a phenomenon. Right?
So, in your opinion, where did it start? Who gets the credit? Because I hear a lot of times you hear Elvis Presley and Jerry Lee Lewis's name thrown around, but there's also a fair number of what you would what they called back in the day, black artists who were up and coming, who really kind of pioneered this new sound. Chuck Berry being one of them.
Bo Diddley and the like. Yeah, when it was starting out, it was sort of an offshoot of blues music. So the way that it sort of goes is there was classical music, and then there was ragtime, and then there was jazz. And then there was blues,
and it's somewhere there was functions there was pieces of all of this in rock music.
That's
like,
right.
Booker T and the MGs. I recall Green Onions. That's obviously a jazz infused, but rock song. So
what was happening was new genres were being invented, and people were taking and it's sort of a begot situation. So jazz begot blues, and blues begot rock and roll, and it's been around for a while, but it didn't get massive mainstream popularity in the 50s, so a lot of people credit Jerry Lee Lewis and Elvis Presley. I think rock music hasn't sounded like that for a very long time. I think rock music has settled into this sort of dual sound, and I credit as far as like the people who brought rock into its own. And created sort of the modern age of rock, created rock as we know it.
When do you think that happened, though?
Yes. So two bands did it, I think. I think in the late 50s, early 60s, it was the Beatles and the Rolling Stones.
So we're talking about the 60s and the British invasion, really, that kind of influenced a lot of the rock music and started it down the path to what we consider rock music.
Right. Mm-hmm. And you talk about the delusion, which is a great word, I think. Is that just, you mean like it sort of lost its focus?
It seemed like it was definitely on a trajectory, and then all these different elements or different groups of people kind of came and put their own spin on it, and it was still rock music, but it came to the point where you could not compare one group. I'm trying to think of somebody like in the 60s that was coming up when this was all going on. Like Eric Clapton and his group Cream.
Yeah. And
you can't compare that to any sound of like Led Zeppelin. Yet it was all around the same time period, and they all started from this root of the beginning of rock and roll. Mm-hmm. So since the modern age, since the Beatles and the Rolling Stones, rock has always sort of had an identity crisis, I feel like. And even that, I say that the Beatles and the Rolling Stones, they sort of started the modern age of music. I think rock and roll sort of references, rock bands since then have referenced those two bands when coming up with their sound. Like, we're going to start with this basis and we're going to add this to it. And I think every band tried to do that in various forms and fashions since then. It's almost kind of like everyone tried to change the game. Since the Beatles and the Rolling Stones, they changed the game, so everyone else tried to change it with them or something. Like, rock and roll is all about individuality over what society tells you to do,
Yeah, and I think the Rolling Stones influenced that more than the Beatles as far
Yes,
as that
they did.
goes. Because you can definitely go down a certain road with the Beatles, and you can see just even how they evolved and how they got a little bit more psychedelic and, more creative in their music writing and performing. But, I mean, you can't bring up the British Invasion, and you talked about individuality without talking about, the Who.
The Who.
They were like the love child rock stars.
Right. Yeah. The British Invasion, the Who, that all came about. And you can sort of see how I call the two factions kind of the Rolling Stones faction, the hard rock faction, and then the Beatles faction, the pop rock faction. So Beach Boys would be in the camp with the Beatles, kind of the thing, and even like sort of the more sanitized versions of rock might go there, maybe like Elton John or Billy Joel ish. Like you don't consider them rock. A lot of websites consider them
not rock music.
Yeah,
no,
but when you think of real,
when I talk about it in generalities, yeah, I could see rock music, rock stars, whatever.
Sure,
but in general, I don't consider them a rock star or rock band. That's just my opinion. But it kind of morphed into this thing, and it's like I think the British Invasion, that part of that individuality, it obviously influenced bands here in America. Like you think of the Doors, which is not it. You kind of broke it up into a Beatles kind of led to and a Rolling Stones going these separate paths and other bands that came as a result of that. And the Doors seems to me it could be almost either or.
Yeah,
it's this kind of mishmash of those two.
Yeah, I see that too. There's bands that have done that over the years. So what went wrong? what happened?
I don't know that I don't think of it as a negative thing.
Right.
I think part of the problem is that we're obsessed with music with putting everything in a box. This is this genre. This is that genre. And a lot of time, particularly with rock music, it's really hard just to nail it down, which is why we have come up with all these subgenres and subgroups that we call things. And actually, this would be a good idea for a later podcast to talk about genres in general and where they're good and bad and how they influence music.
Yeah.
But that's a discussion for another time. Anyway, I don't think it went wrong. I think it was a progression. And you saw the biggest diversity, I would say, in the 60s.
Yes.
And then again later in the 90s. You saw it again in a different way.
Yeah.
But you can see the different shoots that come up. Like you've got, the Rolling Stones and who else have we talked about? Who came up in there?
The Ramones, maybe?
Yeah, well, they were a little bit after 60s. They were the 70s more, I think. But trying to think of a band like that. Like the Kinks.
Okay, yeah.
They were kind of your Beatlesque thing coming up. So we can't forget David Bowie and Jimi Hendrix, who were very flamboyant performers.
Glam rock.
Well, less so with Jimi Hendrix, but
David
definitely
Bowie.
David Bowie. Jimi Hendrix had a little bit of that flair, so I could see where people would kind of
No, but he's not
those
glam rock,
together.
but David Bowie is.
But in the way that they perform and
Yes.
the way they do their music is very flamboyant, and they have that in common, basically. So I see that leading into the 70s, where glam rock really took its hold.
Yeah.
And of course, I'm talking about Queen. I'm talking about
Journey?
Deep Purple. Well, Journey's more 80s. We're not quite there. What about the Pink Floyds and just those very...
Do you mean like avant-garde?
Avant-garde. That's a good word.
Yeah.
They were very just kind of... We had to create new words for these to describe what these bands were and what they did and what they brought.
Yeah, absolutely. Queen is a great example of they weren't afraid of trying out anything.
Genesis either. The early Genesis, like Peter Gabriel Genesis.
I need to look. I haven't done a lot of listening to Genesis.
Yeah, but I would credit them with that same type of movement.
Yeah, you're probably right. So you don't think that? So you talk about a delusion in the '90s era of rock.
Well, let's build up to that because we've got the 70s.
We're building there.
So speaking about those bands that started in the 70s and continued, like that period of time where we really had solid, just what you called rock bands.
And you could not.
It had gone through its change in the '60s, and then it just kind of stayed in its lane for a while. And you knew a rock band was a rock band, and you didn't have to compartmentalize any of it. And that was the Police. Mm-hmm. That was Genesis. Even with the Phil Collins taking over the lead after Peter Gabriel's departure.
Right.
So I mean, they stayed rock bands, and U2.
Right.
That they're kind of more early '80s when they really broke out. But anyway, they're all kind of in that genre of people that were rock bands and then just stayed with it. Mm-hmm. Journey would be one of those.
There you go.
Journey.
There's Journey.
So there we are.
I love Journey.
Yeah.
There's Journey, and was Boston somewhere in there too, I guess?
You know what? We didn't mention Boston, but they're a '70s band that was a rock
70s.
band.
Yeah.
They were a rock band that stayed a rock band. Kiss is another one.
Yep.
Rock band from the '70s that stayed a rock band. You never had to question where they were going. They were in that lane.
They were in that lane. And now we're still in the '80s. We're talking about late '80s.
So let's talk about. Well, yeah, we can. And it kind of. And I want to say that rock was one of those things one of those genres that didn't really change in the '80s from the '70s. Maybe they got a little bit more sophisticated with their music, but it kind of stayed the same. Van Halen, who we're going to talk about later today.
About Van Halen.
Van Halen in the set was a rock band. All kept that whatever their
they had their sound figured out.
They had their sound figured out. Yeah, and they kind of just went with it. They were a rock star. Who else am I talking about? I'm talking about the Motley Crues, even the people that came up in the '80s. Aerosmith, Guns N' Roses. Just, yeah. So those were all bands that were in the '80s, flourished in the '80s, and kept being what they were no matter what.
Right.
So now as you continue on, Def Leppard's another one. So we got to bring up Def Leppard too, because they're another band that hit their stride in the '70s and continued on with that in the '80s, even in the late '80s when it got more popular to kind of pop.
Yes.
And they did it. Some people will argue that Pour Some Sugar on Me, that was kind of one of their more tamer ones. But at its core, it's a rock star.
It's a
rock rock anthem.
Yeah, that's what I see.
So
I see it.
Yeah. So that brings us dragging our feet a little bit into the '90s because we start to see this wane a little bit.
Yes.
And so again, to put it your words. The death or the whatever, the culprit is kind of the '90s culture.
Yeah.
Because rock's, and it was due to happen because rock music had stayed steady for so long, and pop music had went from so many different iterations, from the soft adult contemporary to disco music to indie pop to whatever. And then particularly in the '90s when everything was synth and electronica, and you had bands like CNC Music Factory,
right,
just like pumping out dance music basically.
Right, exactly.
And that was just like constantly this evolving thing, or we could do this, or we can do that, and we'll just slap a pop music label on it and sell it to everybody.
Right.
So, and I think that was part of the struggle that rock music had, is it had a very target audience.
Yeah.
Much more than any other genre of music.
At the time, yeah.
At the time.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I can see that. There was this the grunge bands of the '90s. I think this sort of attitude. Nirvana, exactly, and Kurt Cobain is just sort of had this attitude of, "What does it all matter?" kind of a thing. And it's great music, and it is.
Some of the best bands came out of the '90s, but it definitely blurred the rock genre.
It did. Now you have alternative and punk and all this stuff that's hitting its stride. And is it all rock music? Is metal rock music? Apparently not. And all this stuff, or it's a kind of rock music, or it's its own thing, or so people, I guess, now we get to sort of modern day, and we're sort of at this place where I think people are wanting a return to form. They're sort of hungry for, at least I am. I'm a little hungry for a return to form of those 80s bands, or even my favorite decade of music is the 70s. Those 70s bands. I don't know, a return to form with those guitars, really really solid guitar riffs, and a return to form, a driving drum beat. I don't know, you don't see it. as much as you used to. Maybe.
Yeah, 90s was kind of a mashup, and I think I don't know. We got a little bit back to it in the 2000s, but I mean 90s. I think I still considered it rock music.
Mm-hmm. I would too.
Although it had that, the grunge. Obviously, Nirvana was good for that. Jane's Addiction, Smashing Pumpkins, Radiohead.
Yeah.
Creep is one of the best songs ever recorded.
Yeah.
But then you have in that same area of time that was rock music was Dave Matthews. You can't compare Dave Matthews to Nirvana. There's just no way.
Yeah.
So again, it's more of that delusion.
Yes.
Diluting of the genre or creating even more subgenres.
Yeah.
Like, I'm going to split this one more because I like this part about it and I don't like that part of it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and this is where sort of the identity crisis comes to a head, more or less. Where, I don't know.
There's a few bands that I have to champion or give cred to for at least trying to champion to try to keep the rock element in.
Oh, you do?
Even though they definitely were 90s in their sound.
Sure.
But I think Red Hot Chili Peppers did a pretty good job of being commercially accessible, but keeping that hard rock edge as much as they could.
Yes, I agree.
Another one who did it and is actually kind of Aerosmith is another one. But also Alanis Morissette, who kind of came out in the 90s, tried to keep this rock edge. You had talked to her about it in a previous podcast about Angry.
Yeah.
And I know a lot of women rock musicians just have that, I don't know if that's a stereotype that we place on them because when they're yelling and screaming at the top of their lungs, it's angry. And when men do it, they're excited and they're flamboyant.
Yeah, exactly.
So I feel like she doesn't get a fair enough shake in that, although her music is definitely a more broader range, a more alternative indie, because she doesn't always stay in that lane. Yeah. But I think she gave a little bit of nod to, hey, this is where we're at.
Yeah.
In music, and this is the kind of music I want to make. And
that's an interesting, because Alanis Morissette, I think by 90s standards, this is funny, by 90s standards I think she is a rock musician, but by 80s standards I don't think she is.
Correct. Isn't that interesting?
Yeah.
That's part of the spreading of this wide net that we've cast. Yes.
Yeah, and then at this point you got to question the usefulness of even calling it anything,
Well, and I think the 2000s, if we can move on to that genre.
Sure.
Does start to bring... There's less of them. There's actually far less. Okay. We can spend all day talking about the bands from 70s and the 80s all day. But definitely when you talk about the 2000s moving into even today, there are examples of true rock bands coming back into play, but there's by far fewer of them.
Yeah.
So, like in the early 2000s, Motorhead,
okay,
Green Day,
yeah, Green Day,
Linkin Park, not today's Linkin Park back then.
Back then.
Yeah. So maybe that's a bad example, but anyway, the White Stripes, Dragon Force, those are people trying to be rock bands, rock stars, Muse, Kings of Leon. These are all people that I think are really just trying to stay in that lane and pay homage to rock music. Fall Out Boy's another one, yes. So there you go.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I guess you're right. You just got to kind of look harder for it. They're not on the Billboard charts, I guess, much. I mean, they've had huge hits, obviously, and they make great music.
Yes.
But the radio favors the pop sound.
Well, and since you bring that up, because I know that this is going to be your argument for this particular band,
okay,
you did a little bit of a dig at Nickelback.
I did, and I'm speaking on behalf of rock fans.
Nickel haters?
Yeah, Nickel haters. Yeah, I'm not a huge Nickel hater, but I think I can listen to a handful of Nickelback songs in a row. But people, I don't know, there's a certain subsect of people who feel like rock music isn't what it used to be. And that Nickelback...
Nothing ever is.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. So there's that argument too. So while I see what they're seeing, maybe they're just...
But here's my thing though. My thing with defending Nickelback is that they're not a pop band.
No, they're not.
They're not alternative.
Mm-hmm.
What do you call them though if they're not a rock band?
Right. You can't really. No, they are a rock band. I'm not disputing that.
Okay.
I just don't think people like them very much, and I think it's because maybe that they felt like they're not committed to the rock art or whatever. Maybe people feel like that they are
just in it for the paycheck, right? We're going to get a band together and make some money and turn the world.
Just maybe they feel like they're by the numbers or that, and whatever. If their music just doesn't speak to them. I think that I'm not the biggest Nickel hater. I don't think they killed rock music. That's giving them a lot of credit. No one's killed rock music. Rock music is
so who's good right now today? Who do you like?
Rock music wise?
Yes.
Okay. I really like Fall Out Boy. I think they're the strongest, and Green Day's a little less modern, but I like them. This is sort of in the modern era.
They're still putting out music.
I like Muse. You mentioned Muse.
Yes.
Certain flavors of Panic at the Disco you might call rock music, and I like it. I like it when they go into the rock area.
Yeah.
As well. So those
definitely have the flamboyant part of the rock down.
Yes, they do. I like that. I feel like Brandon Urie, Panic at the Disco can be a great stand-in. I feel like they could be a great rock stand-in for Queen if they really wanted to be. I don't know if they ever will, but
he's getting well. And I just from what you read, I'm a big fan of his. I love him in all his iterations, no matter if he's doing more pop stuff or more alternative stuff or whatever. Mm-hmm. I just think he's got one of the best voices.
Absolutely.
He's probably the only male 4-octave vocalist in mainstream pop music right now.
One that I can think of. Yeah,
off the top of my head. I mean, not to disparage anybody else out there.
No.
But having said that, I still wouldn't consider him a rock band.
I wouldn't. I don't think I would either.
Yeah. Okay.
That's why I sort of
So all these years of evolution of rock music, and we have Fall Out Boy.
Yeah. What?
I mean,
you don't think?
No, I just mean there's got to be more.
Yeah.
There's got to be more people that can do that.
Yeah, you're right. Music is maybe.
You think it's a studio run thing?
Yeah, maybe
studios are just want to zone in on that pop zone and milk it for all it's worth.
I mean, maybe it just is simply that, like the fact that it's not as marketable as other kinds of music, and so it's not as popular.
Well, it just doesn't seem. It doesn't seem fair to me that there's 20 or so Fall Out Boy rock bands in the world today, and not to disparage people that've been around forever, like U2, which I love, but you got 100 Ariana Grandes running around.
Yes.
And it's just like, come on.
You're right. No, yeah, and everyone sees that. I think what people are hungry for is more variation in their music, because you do have all those Ariana Grandes. You have all these pop single artist vocalist with a hip hop backing artists.
And we're not dissing the Taylor Swift's and Katy Perry's and Ariana Grande's.
It's fine. It's good in its own right. It's good in its own right, but there's just a lot of it.
There just seems to be a disproportionate amount of that type of music out there.
I suppose I guess we're the movie equivalent of saying there's too many Marvel movies out there, which has its arguments for and against. But anyway.
So I guess a case could be made for, your question of what killed, rock music, and it's money killed it.
Money killed rock music.
People are chasing money.
Yeah,
and they're gonna go where the money goes. So
that to me is that's a good one.
That's a little unfortunate, but
that's the biggest culprit. Blame money.
Yes,
yeah.
Well, speaking of money, we're gonna talk about one of the biggest rock bands to come out of the 70s and 80s, and that is Van Halen.
Van Halen. Okay, so we got our top fives here. We each made our own top fives, independent of each other.
Yeah, we have no idea what the other one is going to say for their top 5 Van Halen hits. But why don't you start us out?
Sure, I got my number 5 right here. It is "Why Can't This Be Love?"
That's 5? A good one. That's a good one.
I like it. There's just a very fun vocal hook in the chorus. They do a really great bridge section in that song. And Van Halen that one is sort of...
That's a Sammy Hagar led song, right?
I don't know.
Yeah, dude, Sammy Hagar.
Oh, did that one? Led that one? Okay. Yeah. So that I like that one. I'm putting that at number 5.
Okay, my number 5 is actually another Sammy Hagar one, and it's Right Now.
Right Now.
Which was, I don't know, probably midway through Sammy Hagar's stint with them. Mm-hmm. And this one really spoke to me because it really showed a grown-up side of Van Halen. It lyrically was much more serious.
Yeah.
I mean, we're not talking about lyrics like on Hot for Teacher, which are just, fun and, somewhat controversial.
They
sexual,
they give them
whatever.
the purpose, yeah.
But yeah, so, but right now, just the whole political message that it sent out and about the times and, basically saying, now's the time to be a grown-up and make the right choices and do what you want to do. And it was clearly a departure from their normal, let's just have fun and party message. Plus, it was just great. The synthesizer at the beginning of that started in, and I just liked the way the whole construct of the song. And I just had to include it in my top 5 because I thought it was worthy of being mentioned.
Yeah.
And I tried to be, in my picks of all my Van Halen, I tried to pick out things that I liked about the band and represented each one of those.
Sure.
So I'm sure there's going to be ones here that people are going to be saying, what the hell, why isn't that song on your list? Mm-hmm. Spoiler alert, Jump is not on my list.
Oh, nor is it on mine.
So, and that's like their biggest song ever.
Right.
So I'm sure some listeners are going to have an issue with that. But Right Now was my number 5.
That's good. That one has a great intro section. That it's sort of the unfolding structure, just in a microcosm. I think just at the start, there's a great long intro, and there's a great adding of instruments and taking away of instruments
before it goes into this
driving mellow
ballad, basic anthem ballad almost.
And it's weird that you could be mellow and driving, but that song does it.
It does it.
So number 4 for me is You Really Got Me. No.
Okay, so you want to hear what my number 4 is?
What?
It's kind of the same.
Yeah.
But I have Eruption / You Really Got Me because it's really 2 tracks on that album. But most of the time on the radio, they played them together.
Really?
So Eruption was that crazy guitar solo from Eddie Van Halen.
I love that song.
Right?
Yeah.
So, and then it leads into the You Really Got Me, which of course was the Kinks cover.
Yes.
The Kinks released it in the 60s. Mm-hmm. And so they did this cover. And so that is actually my number 4 as well.
Oh, fantastic.
So, because I basically, my goal in selecting that one was Eddie Van Halen.
Yeah.
Just that song, Eruption, is Eddie Van Halen.
Yes.
And it's probably one of the best he's ever done.
It's the riff is iconic. It's the great interplay between your vocals and guitar. And what's funny,
well, him and the whole just that double tap thing that he does.
Yes.
I mean, did he coin that? Is he the first person to have done that?
I don't know.
Did he copy other people? It's genius, though. Nobody does it better than he does.
You know what? He's probably the most popular example of the double tapping technique. Because you just see him do it all the time. He does it all the time in his music. So what's also interesting is when you listen to it, it kind of, you talk about rock returning to its roots a little bit.
Yeah.
I hear a 50s like rock progression, chord progression.
Very Chuck Berry.
Yeah, it is Chuck Berry-esque.
Yeah.
And even the lyrical quality is very 1950s.
Well, it was written, I don't know when the song was written, but it was performed, at least the first I heard it was the Kinks, and that was in the 60s. Mm-hmm. So,
well, it's just really cool to see that from a band that's popular in the 80s. That still has a little bit of that return to form in rock music there. You want to do your number 3?
Yeah, my number 3 is probably an odd choice, and I don't know if people are going to agree with me, but it's Dreams, which is another Sammy Hagar-led song.
Yeah.
And I had to pick that one because I think it straddled the line so perfectly. The vocals are great in it. Hagar is in top form. It's rock music, but somehow they infused this synthesized sound into it, but they didn't let it dominate the song. Mm-hmm. Which is very rare because I know when a lot of people do that, they either go way overboard on the synthesizer part of it purposely, like I'm going to have my synth solo here, and then we'll come back into it.
Right.
But it just kind of made its way through the song. It traveled well with the vocals provided by Sammy, and it just, because of that, I had to give it a spot. It's Sammy's best vocal. by far, and that I enjoy, and just the fact that they were able to make it a rock song but incorporate some of the modern technologies and synthesizing into it, just I think is a great example.
A great balance.
I think it's a great balance for them. It lets them know too that this is, I mean, it showed them evolving as a band, and yet not leaving their roots at the same time.
Yeah,
and that's a very hard thing to do.
Yeah, it is. Yeah, it's really a good observation there. My number 3 is Hot for Teacher. I put Hot for Teacher at number 3. That intro drum solo is probably the most famous.
Alex Van Halen.
Yeah, it's probably the most famous drum solo of all time, right? Yeah. Because it's just and the most difficult drum solo of all time. I think that is sort of considered, I think, by drummers the Mount Everest of rock drummers. Especially. If you can do that solo, just like, you got it. You don't need to learn anything else. You know everything you need to know, kind of a thing when you want to be a rock drummer. And it doesn't let up. It's hot, it's crazy all the way through.
Yep.
That's insane to me.
And that's why he's my number 2.
He's your number 2?
Yes.
Hot for Teacher, huh?
Oh, yes.
Nice.
And this song has, the credit goes, the song is Alex Van Halen. That's Eddie's brother on the drums there, Alex.
Yeah.
That song is him.
Yeah.
He is the star of that song. And it's also just kind of endearing. This doesn't have anything to do musically necessarily, but the video is just one of the best videos of all time. And I mean, who can forget the Playboy model teacher?
Yeah.
Dancing around on the desk.
Right.
Yeah, it just was a very. I can't say anything more. You kind of touched on it. It's all Alex, and he shines. He's the rock star in that particular song.
Yeah.
So he's my number 2. Which
did you skip your 3?
No, my 3 was Dreams. So
okay.
I just tapped into that because it was my number 2. So what was your number 2?
My number 2 was Eruption. I put 2.
You put it as a separate song.
A separate song.
Okay.
I did. I know that's sort of like it's just his warm up, right? It's just what he would do to warm up before shows, right?
Yes.
Isn't that all that it was? But I think of Van Halen and I think of virtuosic guitar, and that's all that Eruption is.
Yeah.
And so to me, that captures the essence of what I think of Van Halen. And it's some of the best guitar work ever too.
Yeah, we've already touched on that from before, but yeah.
That, and it's double tapping to the extreme, triple tapping, quadruple tapping. I see people play it and all of their fingers are going on the neck. None of them are they're not strumming at all. They're all on the neck and they're all just, it looks like, I mean, it's crazy. So that's why I put Eruption at number 2. It's just the essence of virtuosic guitar right now.
And I can't say anything more about it that I haven't already said. So, yes, well-deserved placement there for sure.
That's why it's at number 2. So, what you got? Number 1.
My number 1 is Panama. And I had to give credit to that because, well, one of the standout parts of that, besides it just being a great song, it's great in all capacities. It's great just to listen to, or when you're doing stuff around the house. It's a great driving song. It's just great everything. But it is also David Lee Roth at his top vocal. And which is funny because he has his little speak parts in there, that he talks about. But also when he's doing his yelling, and I'm not talking about like his screaming like he does in Jump, and that little high pitched. I can't even do it. The little that. I can't do that at all. So I'm not even going to try. But when he does it with Panama and he's yelling out that name, he is staying in tune. He's got control of his voice. It doesn't crack. He is hitting those notes, and he doesn't. I mean, he's got to, after every take, just be catching his breath because he is so full force, but yet so controlled.
Yes.
And of course, David Lee Roth gets a lot of credit for when he left the band after their height, basically 1984, and then he left. He killed Van Halen, which Sammy Hagar proved was not true. But I do have to give him some credit because, particularly on that song, he's kind of the unsung hero. I don't think he got enough credit. I think that should have been their number 1 hit. Actually, Jump do you know, was their only number one hit on the Billboard charts.
Is that right?
The only one that went to number one. They charted a lot, but to hit that peak spot, Jump was the only song that did that. And not, again, that didn't appear in my top 5. You said it didn't appear in yours.
Nope.
Not to disparage that song, because it is a great, great song and one of my favorites. It just is not Van Halen at their best. I think the reason it did so well, we've kind of touched on when we're talking about a rock thing. It was probably their most mainstream sounding song that they came out with. So everybody could say, yeah, that's a good song, regardless of whether they were a fan of Van Halen rock music or whatever.
That's
so
right.
that was Panama is just a great song, and one that is just Van Halen legend, you know.
Yeah, I thought a lot about Panama. That has some really interesting chord fills in there, like the part where it goes right before the chorus, like the pre-chorus. They fall down, I think, chromatically chord-wise before they go back into the chorus. It's really interesting stuff, that song. My number one is Ain't Talking About Love.
Yeah, that's a good one too.
Ain't Talking About Love. They got this beautiful dreamlike solos and a wonderful contrast that's drawn between the chorus and the verses.
And that's early in Van Halen career, right?
Oh,
that's
I don't know.
First or second album?
I don't know. I was just listening to the music.
Yeah.
And but I just love the mood that they create in that one. And it's funny because it's not all go, 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 go. Like you think of Van Halen, you think it's just like crazy the whole way through. It's not. And what they do is they create a great, brilliant contrast, really, between when they get the verses and the chorus together, and you put them next to each other. A good song can take you to two different places and still make you feel like you're listening to the same song. And I really think that they achieved that with Ain't Talking About Love.
That is one of my favorites. It just didn't make my top 5. So,
right.
Yeah, no.
So there we go. That's our top 5 Van Halen.
Yeah, so you guys let us know if you think we missed one completely, or any thoughts about that. You can definitely leave a comment. And we want to hear what you have to say about what we talked about. Which leads us to our homework section.
Yes.
And you gave me a homework assignment that I enjoyed much more than the last one, I would say.
Okay, that's good.
I had fun with it.
Improvement. That's good. Okay, sure.
So I was supposed to research Smooth McGroove, which is he's kind of a YouTube artist that does looped a cappella vocals of video game soundtracks, I guess you call them, compositions. And so, not to get specifically on Smooth McGroove first, but a couple things that stood out to me is that I was kind of impressed with just the composers of these video game music. It's really composited music. It's really
well composed.
It's well composed.
Yes.
Thank you.
Well orchestrated.
Well orchestrated music, and you don't get that. It's lost, and because that's not the point of the video game. It's the visual.
Yeah.
And the music is very much just supporting. But when you're watching his videos it is, I mean, he's got pictures of the video game going on while he's singing it.
Yes.
And all the different parts, and then he integrates everything. It's very interesting. You can really see the workmanship that goes into making these video games. Of course, they're limited. Well, less so nowadays. But he's very heavy on Nintendo.
Yes.
It's mostly Nintendo games.
Classic
I mean, there was a few others out there. There was a Kingdom Hearts game and a couple others that weren't exclusively Nintendo anyway. But he drives a lot on the Nintendo stuff, the Mario Kart and the
8-bit, 16-bit era.
Yeah, so he really capitalized on those, and it was fun. It's not driving music.
No.
but it's very enjoyable.
Yeah.
And I had fun getting into it and looking, just being exposed to it. It was kind of a fun, different trip to take. I'm like, oh, that sounds pretty good. And I found myself, I would take times and I would like turn my phone down so I wasn't looking at the visual, because most of his videos are of him singing all the parts. It's like a Brady Bunch block.
Exactly.
On his video.
Yeah.
And so he'll have like blocks of him singing all the different parts and like the video game portion of it going on in the middle of it.
Yeah.
So, and you can see him responding. The other thing that I was kind of surprised about is how he looked.
Yeah.
I just, expected, this is something some kid would have done, and he's not. He's like a hillbilly man.
Bearded man. He's a mountain man looking guy.
But with a great voice.
Yes.
And, that was a fun little project to get into. I had no clue as to who he was, so that's always fun to find something new that you like.
Yeah.
Just like I didn't know anything about Who is it?
Death Clock.
Death Clock. Yeah. So sometimes I'm okay with not learning about people, but that was not the case there.
Well, that's good. I'm so glad you pulled out of it what you did. And what I appreciate about his videos is that you do see all the different parts that go into video game music. You see it all broken up, right? So that you can sort of appreciate what these composers put into their craft. So really cool. I'm glad you liked it. My homework assignment was Stevie Nicks.
Stevie Nicks.
You gave me Stevie Nicks to look at because I have never really sat down and given a clear listen.
Yeah, you haven't been a hater per se. You just have never really been a fan.
That's true. It's just that I've never. I don't know. They just some people would bring them up and you got to listen to them, and I'd be like, okay, and then I just never would.
Be it Fleetwood or Stevie or whatever.
Yeah, I just never sat down and listened to them, and I've done my time with most legendary rock bands, so this is just sort of a hole in my resume. I was looking at mainly Stevie Nicks, and I was just looking at some of these songs. And first of all, I do like Stevie Nicks. I like Stevie Nicks, and I like Fleetwood Mac. I did some concerted listening to their most popular album. I'm forgetting the name. I didn't write it down.
Are you talking about Fleetwood Mac?
Yeah.
Rumors, probably?
Yeah. That one. And then I was, some other stuff. Edge of 17.
Yeah, that's classic.
Classic. And then,
So what would you say was your best or your favorite Fleetwood or Stevie Nicks?
Sure. There's a song called Dreams. Fleetwood Mac does.
Gosh, one of my favorites.
It's one of my favorites.
It's written by Stevie.
It was my favorite that I listened to.
Awesome. You picked a good one to be your favorite.
Yeah, good. It just the piercing lyrics. And this is when it struck me about Fleetwood Mac. Very folksy lyrics. Very.
Well, she's very gypsy.
Yeah, well, that's what it reminded me of. The lyrics reminded me of folk music lyrics, which you don't normally get in a rock band. In rock band, it's usually simple lyrics that service the music. In this case, it's really like the lyrics are a crucial part of the song. I felt like, and Dreams, and it has this beautiful, relaxed feel. It's just her voice carrying the song.
Yes,
it's just Stevie's voice.
Yes,
that carries the song all the way through. And then you have a beautiful psychedelic guitar fading in and out, sort of a thing. So that was my favorite. That was my favorite that I listened to. But I also liked Rhiannon. The Chain, it's bluegrass guitar work feel.
Yeah, The Chain, that's a Fleetwood Mac one.
Landslide.
Landslide, another one that she wrote. That's great.
Yeah, and also Go Your Own Way. Those are my favorites.
Yeah.
So, and Edge of 17. So that was my listening project. And I enjoyed it myself.
I'm glad you got appreciation for it.
I think I would pick up Fleetwood Mac again when I was in a folksy mood. I would sort of pick them up when I'm sort of in a Simon and Garfunkel kind of mood. And be like, Simon Garfunkel, no, I'm just going to do Fleetwood Mac this time. I think that's what I'll do next.
Very cool. Well, I'm glad you enjoyed it.
I did. So we got to assign each other new homework assignments for our next podcast.
What you got for me?
All right. Cool. I got a good one. There's this guy. He's another internet artist. His name is Bill Wirtz. And he has a YouTube channel, and he had a viral video that went out. It wasn't a music video, but it was called like The History of the World. It's like a 20-minute video where he just literally goes from like the start of the creation of Earth to modern day. He just rapid fire all the events in history. But he also is sort of like, musically, he's sort of like Owl City's weird cousin.
Okay.
I would say. He's got this kooky, lighthearted feel. He fills the Owl City hole in my heart, I would say. So I wrote down a couple songs here that he wrote. Right there. Those are. He doesn't do a lot of writing, but the music he does produce, I think, is really solid and interesting musically. I really want him to get more attention because he does some really cool work. So Bill Wirtz.
Very good. I will work on that.
Yes. So what's mine?
For you, I want you to look into, and you may know who this is,
okay.
But I want you to look into him a little bit deeper, and that's James Blunt. Do you know who he is?
No, I don't.
He's I think he might. Once you listen to him, you'll recognize a few songs for sure.
Okay.
And he is a singer-songwriter, guitarist. He is someone, and I don't want to make this necessarily part of the the project, but he is someone who came up right about the same time Ed Sheeran did.
Okay.
And where Ed Sheeran had kind of a slow build, James Blunt kind of blew up on the scene right at first, and then just kind of drifted off over the years. He's still putting out music. I think his last album came out 2017, but he's still putting out music. But and I think he's much more famous in the UK. They're both English, but I want you to give him a listen because I think he gives Ed Sheeran a run for his money.
Oh, very
and I
cool.
don't understand. I mean, I understand his first blow up, his songs. He has that song "You're Beautiful." Do you know that song?
I think so.
Yeah. So that's probably his biggest hit that most people will know, and that's off of his first album. So his first album came in, blew up. I think he sold 20 million copies, So he was kind of a name, and I think it was definitely bigger in Britain than in the UK in general. But still, I think he's the unsung Ed Sheeran. So give him a listen and tell me what you think, and maybe even why you think he didn't continue on the same trend as Ed Sheeran did. I mean, again, Ed Sheeran was a little bit different. He was a slower build and built up because Ed Sheeran's been making music for the same amount of time, but yet I don't think his first commercially successful album in the US anyway came out to 2010, something like that.
Yeah.
But this guy started in 2004 and has been printing out. He puts out a new album maybe every 3 or 4 years, so he's not one of these constantly churning out stuff.
Yeah.
I think he's one of these artists that when he feels like he has enough to say, he puts it together and says it to us.
That's good.
But anyway, give him a listen.
See
what you think.
I respect that. So James Blunt?
James Blunt.
How it sounds?
Yeah, and actually, well, it's not. It's funny. His Blunt. That's his stage name.
Okay.
His real name is actually pronounced the same way, James Blunt, but it's spelled in kind of some funky English way. I don't know.
Okay.
So I think he
Blount
something like that. And so I think he purposely changed the spelling of his name for commercial purposes and to make it easier for people to say, well, there's only one way you can say that.
Yeah.
So
for real. All right, I'll give him a listen. He sounds really interesting. All right.
Well, we appreciate you guys listening to us, and hope you guys check out our next podcast.
Yeah, we'll be releasing regularly. Our plan is to release twice a week. Please give us a look at our Twitter handle when that goes up. Tweet us answers to these questions. What do you think of our podcast? What do you want us to talk about next?
Give us some ideas, some things you want to talk about.
It'd be great. All right, so we'll sign off. Talk to you next week, huh?
Thanks.
Bye.
Bye.